Hello everyone. I'm going to start with part 2 of Fascism. The book is Political Ideology by Andrew Hayward. And before proceeding on to part 2nd, let's have what we have learned so far in part 1st. So we have seen that this particular ideology, which is first incoherent, contradictory, violent, and has been equated with all the negative consequences such as genocide, um, you can say rampant misuse of political machinery, mobilization of people for wrong acts. So this history of fascism, it has been stained with bloodshed. So the first question emerge here is, how can the people of that time believe in this ideology and were so mobilized by this violent streak? And at the first, another way of putting is that if only Mussolini and Hitler believed in such an idea, thing could not have been that wrong. Because in this world, everyone is free to hold the thoughts of their own. They are free to have their own expression, free to have any, you can say, any skewed idea of what the world is. So it's not the worldview of an individual that concern the study of international relations. It is not the worldview or individual view held by a certain person in his own psyche, in his own shell. So uh, we know that in this whole world, anyone from any corner of the world can hold any kind of idea, however bizarre they are. So it's not about the idea that were held by Mussolini and Hitler. The problem started when the same idea were shared by millions of people. And those skewed idea, those perverted idea were so extreme in their genre, so extreme in their expression, still they could mobilize millions of people. So how could this happen? How could certain idea mobilize people to kill their own brothers? How could the ideas of two person can incite people to burn everything down, to incite people for their own loss and devastation? So this is the thing. That's why uh, this particular ideology is still hated, and it is tried. It is assured to keep this particular thing restrained, this particular ideology restrained, because most of the other ideology, whether you take realism, liberalism, Marxism, Gandhism, statism, nationalism, all other ideas, all other political ideas, they also held uh, different ideas on all matters of all aspects of finances, economy, how people should behave, how people should be governed, who should govern the law, who should make the law, how things should be discussed, how rules should be implemented, how policy should be administered. So all of those aspects had their different views, their different poncho in different ideologies. But ultimately, all of them, they were peaceful up to a larger extent. They were peaceful. But this particular ideology, fascism, it is riled and stained in blood, and that's why it is hated. So again, the question starts. The question ends where we started. How could such an idea mobilize millions of people to kill their own brethren, incite people for genocide? So It's not that the same ideas were shared by just two people out of millions of people of the time. So if fascism emerged as an idea, emerged as a political ideology, and reign over 3 or 4 countries, then it is believed that it had something that incited people. It touched some nerves, and that nerve was insecurity. Yes, you can divide times between two polarized extents. One is good time, which can be called peaceful time, and the other are bad times. So most of the political ideology, they cater to good times. So, or in short, they keep good times in mind while they formulate their own versions. But the same story, it gets a new turn, or it becomes formidable opponent whenever bad times come. Because first, bad times are unpredictable. You cannot imagine what kind of bad times are going to come in the future. So it's kind of a black wall, a black hole. And second thing is, most of the political ideology that are present in the present times, or whichever time they ruled in, they are insufficient or incapable of catering to those times. They are incapable of addressing the rough tides, incapable of addressing the rough tides. And that's why during the rough times, during the tough times, most of the organs, most of the machinery, and most of the platforms that are built during peaceful times, they are demolished. Usually we call it revolution, but it happens that those institutions that are catering to and addressing to the needs and worries of peaceful time, they fall incapable of addressing the same events whenever the rough tides appear, and then those scaffolds, those buildings are demolished. Because the same thing happened when the events of First World War, which called the first large scale, first worldwide devastation, global damage. Second, the 1929 global depression, followed by industrialization, rise of capitalism, and the inherent exploitation, which is hated by many. Then loss of livelihood because of change, because of technological change. So all such issues, when they club together, they fomented people to rise against what what is there for them, but it is incapable. So people usually rise against such important or incapable structure. And the same way, fascism is that tide, is that rise of people, is that venting of anger that people needs and that people usually direct against such important structures. But another element is, yes, the fascism is like it's a mobilization of anger. When people are angry, their anger needs to be channelized, and some pretentious elements, some negative elements, such some rogue elements, such as Mussolini, Hitler, and many such, they channelize people's anger into a wrong direction, and it is for them to hold their power. And this greed for power and this consistency in maintaining their power, they can stoop to any level. And this is how fascism and its consequences appeared in the history. But again, then there is another thing, that it is not just that fascism is all about bloodshed. Even if most of its history, most of its results, most of its action that are stained with blood, other than that, it is also about the rapid force. So this rapid force in any sphere, even if you take mobilization of people, uh, let's say conscription. So during peaceful time, conscription is the mandatory service of people in army, mandatory military service. So if you are a citizen of any country, there is a provision in your constitution about such a service, that your country, your military can seek your service, and that can be mandatory if you are capable of servicing in it, and if there is a lack of or dearth of military personnel, and this happens during wartime. Such mobilization, such conscription were very in high numbers. Then the same mobilization were happen on different grounds also, such as technological upgradation. So in both the example of fascism in Italy and Germany, both of them they upgraded themselves rapidly in technological spheres. Then third element, weaponization. It also grows to a greater extent. And then with weaponization come rearmaments. And when weaponization and rearmaments come, it is definitely will followed by expansionism, which means to take another country by force, which is in military terms means conquest. So all such the other elements also come into ground, come into surface, and then with the technological upgradation, industrialization, the forces of which or the activities of which they are also rapid during reigns, both the reigns of the fascism in Italy and Germany. Now let's proceed with the chapter. So next core theme of fascism is leadership and elitism. So fascism also stands apart from conventional political thought in its radical rejection of equality. So it's another element that fascism, it totally rejects equality. It is deeply elitist and fiercely patriarchal. Elitist or elitism, it means there is a hierarchy in society in which the top positions they are held by elite people, and the other non-conventional and other non-powerful positions they are held by normal people. Then fascism in both the instances of Italy and Germany, they are deeply elitist and fiercely patriarchal. They believe that human beings are born with radically different abilities and attributes, and they believe that society is composed broadly of three kinds of people. First, there is a supreme and all-seeing leader. Then, second, there is a warrior elite, exclusively male and distinguished. And third, they are masses who are weak, inert, and ignorant, and whose destiny is unquestioning obedience. So, even if most of the idea they can be refuted and unbelievable, yet fascism stood through them. So, such a pessimistic view of capability of ordinary people put fascism starkly at odds with the idea of liberal democracy. Yes, so that's another interpretation that liberal democracy, it gives people equality, even if they are differently capable, even if they are born under different circumstances. Liberal democracy, it gives political equality, that people are equal at least at political level, because economic and social equality cannot be ensured. If people are born with different capabilities, let's say someone who because of his talent works on fame and prestige and money, and someone maybe because of his own ignorance does not screw up that much and is not up to that financially stable position. In such a situation, economic inequality cannot be ensured. At least it cannot be ensured constitutionally. But political equality, it can be given. The fastest approach to leadership, especially in Nazi Germany, it was crucially influenced by Friedrich Nietzsche's idea of Ubermans, means the overman, the superman, or a supremely gifted, a powerful individual. So here, it won't be improper to say that fascism has uh, tracked along a different surface, tracked along a different route on all possible ideas of a man's life. And still, this particular ideology is prospered and it mobilized people. It is a miracle in itself. But yes, tough time can bend people to any such level. Then Friedrich Nietzsche's idea, his idea, they most of them fully developed in his work. Thus spoke Zarathustra. So Nietzsche, he portrayed Superman as an individual who rises above the hard instinct of conventional morality and lives according to his own will and desire. So you can say a German philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche, his idea were also hailed. His ideas were often used and misused by such leaders. So in the same way, the Ubermans, which according to Nietzsche, a Superman, a person who rise above the herd instinct, who rise above common people and live according to his own will and desire. And this can have multiple interpretation. It does not mean a man need to become a violent warrior. Even an ascetic, excuse me, the curse is not yes, ascetic or a hermit who lives high up in the Himalayas, high up in the mountains, who live a solitary life. So here, this person also, his example can also be taken into account where he has rose against above the herd instinct, rose above normal people and living according to his own will and desire. And even some person who is, let's say, take the example of Gandhi, uh, or you can take example of Bhagat Singh or many other freedom revolutionaries. So all of them, all the freedom fighters, they also rose against those uh, daily problem, daily issues, and lived according to their own will and desire. So it does not mean that this particular idea should be interpreted in this violent way. Anyway, so taking cue from his works, fascist leader they styled themselves as leader. So Mussolini he proclaimed himself to Deus, while Hitler he adopted the title the Führer. And in this way, leadership became exclusively an expression of charismatic authority that emanate, that spread from the leaders himself. While constitutional, or in Max Weber's term, legal rational authority operates within a framework of law and rules, charismatic authority is potentially unlimited. So here the distinction is given that these people, these fascist leader and their perverted idea, they not only skewed, not only wrongly interpreted someone's work, but they also misuse those provisions to get a hold of people's psyche. So such charismatic authority, where by means of words, by means of action, they can also lead people for some constructive work, such as again the nationalist leaders, the freedom fighters. All of them they moved people. Let's take example of Bhudan movement, if you can remember. So Bhudan movement. So in this movement, one Gandhian was spearheaded by one of disciple of Gandhi, Vinoba Bhave, and he and many such like-minded people, they extorted people. They exhorted, not extorted. They exhorted people. mm, They convinced big landlord to distribute the extra land held by them. So Bhudan itself literally means to donate land. So it was their charisma because of which they were able to convince such a powerful lobby of people. So here to equate charisma with violence is again a refutable argument. But then we are talking about what has already occurred. So then such charismatic leader it take form of many slogans. So in Germany, it was Adolf Hitler is Germany, Germany is Adolf Hitler. And the same way in Italy, the principle that Mussolini is always right. Then the leader principle in German, that's Führerprinzip, the principle that all authority emanates from leader personally. So it's not difficult to understand what it means that all the authority, all the power that were concentrated in the hands of a single leader, and such principles were eulogized, such principles were taken into high esteem, and they were regarded as if they were cast in stone. So such intermediate institutions such as elections, parliament, party, they were either abolished or weakened, and that would have ultimately happened one way or another. Now, it is believed that the leader possesses a monopoly of ideological wisdom. The leader and leader alone defines the destiny of people. Such ideas, they ultimately gives sovereignty in hands of a single man and result in a form of totalitarian democracy. So the role of the leader is to awaken the people to their destiny to transform an inert mass into a powerful and irresistible force. So this is uh, you can say this is a requisite argument. Yeah, this a plausible, a viable argument that whoever is the leader, he has an innate responsibility to drive people to their destiny, to help people in achieving their destiny, to transform people, to channelize people into an irresistible force. But that force need to be constructive, not destructive. So fascist regimes thus exhibited populist mobilizing features that set them clearly apart from traditional dictatorship. So this difference between fascism and traditional dictatorship is whereas traditional dictatorship aimed to exclude the masses from politics, totalitarian dictatorship, which is here in case of fascist leader, they set out to recruit people into the values and goals of regime through constant propaganda and political agitation. So in short, so when it comes to political mobilization, the difference it lies in the inclusion of people. So the traditional dictatorship, they usually exclude people from the politics, whereas fascist leaders or fascism, it tries to channelize people into a destructive force. And this destruction happen, it is done via constant propaganda and political agitation. Now let's have perspective on authority. So liberals, they believe that authority arises from below through the consent of the governed, which means consent of the individual, consent of subject, consent of citizens. And authority is rational, purposeful, and limited. On the other hand, conservative, they see authority as arising from natural necessity, which is authority should be exercised from above, from the elites, from the political masters, by virtue of unequal distribution of experience, social position, and wisdom. Then socialists, they are typically suspicious of all kinds of authority, which they regard as implicitly oppressive. And nevertheless, socialist society, they have endorsed the authority of collective body, such as uh, social organization, socialist communes, communist parties. Then anarchists, they view all form of authority as unnecessary and destructive by equating authority with oppression and exploitation. And finally, fascists, they regard authority as a manifestation of personal leadership or charisma that we have seen. Now, let's have a look at the next core theme of fascism, which is socialism. So, both Mussolini and Hitler, they portray their idea as form of socialism. And although the notion of link between socialism and fascism is deeply controversial and rejected by virtually all society, yet it was their harking back, their portrayal that is talked about here. So Hitler, through uh, newspaper, he talked about a philosophy called National Socialism, which, to some extent, undoubtedly, this represented a cynical attempt to elicit support from urban workers. So here again, even if the fascists try to equate their economic principle with socialism, here it is given that such attempt were there to take the support, to garner the support of urban workers. Nevertheless, despite obvious ideological rivalry between fascism and socialism, fascists did have an affinity for certain socialist ideas and position. So in the first place, lower middle class fascist activity has had a profound distaste for large scale capitalism. So the meaning of the specific paragraph is that there is an ideological rivalry between fascism and socialism. As you can say, this distinction, it clearly arises from the first position, which is the position of a leader. Whereas fascism, it considers the position of supreme leader, a single leader, to be supreme and unquestionable. Whereas socialists, they believe that power should be given to people, and power should be held collectively. So you can see a difference of night and day here. One at the one side, fascism is talking about unquestionable power in single hand, whereas socialists, they talk about distribution of power to all hands. So despite this ideological differences, fascists did have some relations with socialist ideas. The reason of which is the first reason that lower middle class fascist activists were the backbone, because the fascist idea, they were run by people themselves, and fascist leader, they needed support of such people. So this dislike for large scale capitalism, it brought those middle class people into the folds of fascism. So this was the first affinity. Then socialism and leftist ideas were therefore prominent in German grassroots organizations such as SA or Brown Shirts. Second, fascism, like socialism, it subscribed to collectivism, which means fascism places the community above the individual. So here, this placing of community above the individual, it is not about power sharing, which is the feature of socialism. So fascism itself, it talks about power, concentration of power should be in hands of one leader. But to keep the people in their tight grip so that no one can ever question the authority of the single leader, they needed this. They needed people to forget that they are individual. The people should be taught that they are a collective body, and it's the will of collective body that should be held into account, that should be taken into account. So the purpose of which is fascism or fascist leader, they did not want any question on their authority, and this could happen only when people they are not given individual authority or individual rights. So it was an attempt of fascist leader to remove all traces of individuality in people. Because if people learn that they are individual, if people take their individuality into account, if people regard their own rights, then the unquestionable power cornered by the leader will be in danger. Anyway, from UPSC perspective, you can you can be asked to provide the affinity or ideological match between socialism and fascism, and here are the points. Well, second point, that fascism places the community above individual, and you have been given the reasons. Then fascism also, despite the materialism that capitalism fosters. So this is another difference. The third difference, that fascists hate the capitalists more than they hate the socialists. So that's another reason for the proximity of fascism with socialism. Then third, the fourth reason, fascist regime are all often practiced socialist style economic policies that were designed to regulate or control capitalism. So in one way or another, capitalism was thus subordinated to ideological objective of fascist state. And in the words of Oswald Mosley, a leader of British Union of Fascists, put it, capitalism is a system by which capital use the nation for its own purposes. So you can see here that capitalism was not taken into good light by the fascists, and the reasons are not difficult to understand. First, capitalism, it is more about freedom, equality, and such liberal principles. And those liberal principles at political level, they are a clear danger to fascist regimes. And then capitalism, even if it is exploitative, the works of it, the activities of it, they happen via rationalist ideas, whatever the economic activity is. So this rationalism, it is glaringly absent from fascist idea, and they do not want people to be rational, because if they start reasoning, then the reason will be a quench, will be a race for their own power. So both the Italian and German regimes, they try to band big business to their own political end through policies of nationalization and state regulation. And they also resorted to four-year plan on the lines of the Soviet idea of five-year plan. However, the notion of fascist socialism, it also has severe limitations. So again, it is important for UPSC perspective. It will help you provide a balanced answer. So the limitations of fascist socialism are, first, the leftist element within fascist movement, such as SA in Germany and Sorelian revolutionary syndicates in syndicalist in Italy, they were quickly marginalized when fascist parties gained power. So once again, it shows that fascists, even if they did come closer to socialism, ultimately they were centered around, they cared about their own power. So it was a power tool, a power dynamic, you can say a tactic to get hold of people. So once their purpose is done, they started marginalizing, started cornering the socialist or leftist element in the fascist regimes. And since they held power, so they also try to cultivate the support of big business, because it is the big business which is going to provide weapons provide with money, and they are also easy to control. If you compare a whole mass of people versus a few individuals, few big businesses, then it becomes very difficult to shake hands with the big business because they will provide money, they will provide security, and they are also easy to administer. So the era of or the romance of fascists with socialism, it ended once their purpose was done. So, and this end of romance, it happened on the night of the long knives in 1934, when Nazi Germany, it purged the leftist element by murdering the SA, uh, the organization, the leftist element of fascist Germany, and murder its leader, Ernst Röhm. So that's why Marxists, they have argued that the purpose of fascism, it was to salvage capitalism rather than to subvert it. So, and again, fascist idea about organization of economic life of people, they were vague and inconsistent. And then last, finally, anti-communism was more prominent within fascists than anti-capitalism. Because, as I've said, communism is a political idea, a political ideology which talks about sharing of power. So fascist leaders, they could have shared everything but power. Power was dear to them, and they would have avoided any such ideology that talk about sharing power among many people. Mm. Capitalism, it is an economic ideology. It is not a political ideology. So in one way, it was better for them to side with the capitalism. But as I've said, or as the text says, fascist leaders in the beginning, they needed support of people. They needed a tight grip of people, for which they try to get the company of socialism so that they can make it clear that they are hearts and minds of people. But ultimately, their face was revealed when they started murdering the same element that supported them. And again, it's the same thing. This this idea could not have worked with fascism. Both of them, they were cores apart. They are poles apart. So a core objective of fascists was to seduce the working class away from Marxism and Bolshevism, which preached the insidious and even traitorous idea of international working class solidarity. So here the answer is given. The answer is clear. They did not want any other solidarity, any other political activity other than their own power, or other than power, ensuring their own power. Then the next feature, ultranationalism. Fascism, it embraced the extreme version of chauvinistic and expansionist nationalism. Fascist nationalism did not preach respect for distinctive culture or national tradition, but asserted the superiority of one nation over all others. So this ultranationalism, it means that fascist leaders, they mobilize people by exhorting their own superior culture. And one way, one explicit racial nationalism or Nazism, it was reflected in the idea of Aryanism. Aryanism is an idea which means that the blue-eyed Nordic Aryan is the best race in the world. So one difference of fascist leader with any other nationalist character is the exalting the superiority of their own culture with all other cultures. Then fascism, it seeks to promote more than mere patriotism. It wishes to establish an intense and militant sense of national identity, which the right-wing French nationalist Charles Maurras called integral nationalism. Fascism, it embodies a sense of messianic and fanatical mission, the prospect of national regeneration and rebirth of national pride. So these are these ideas at social and religious level, they are inflammatory. And in the recent year, even in the third decade of 21st century, we have seen many countries in the world, they are harking back, they are talking about such ideas, such regeneration of national pride, such a revocation of ancient ideas, having such messianic and fanatical missions. So as I have said, fascism, it is a an exploitative character of rough times. You can say um, a different interpretation to salvage during tough times. Then again to the chapter, uh, it's a characteristic of ultranationalism that it wished to establish integral nationalism by which it wants to regenerate the lost pride. And according to Griffin, the mythic core of generic fascism is the conjunction of idea of palingenesis or recurrent birth and populist ultranationalism. All fascist movements therefore highlight the moral bankruptcy and cultural decadence of modern society, but proclaim the possibility of rejuvenation, offering the image of the nation as rising phoenix-like from the ashes. So here you can see what nerve, what emotions do they exploit in people. So all fascist leader, they highlight that the society, modern society, it has culturally decreased, the culturally destroyed, and but even if the culture has been destroyed, even if the culture is in decay, it is they, the fascist leader, they have the responsibility and they they have the way out, they have the hope to rejuvenate what has been lost. And such idea, such uh, visualization of rise of culture like a phoenix, it it gains a popular mass base, a popular support, especially during the tough times. However, in practice, national regeneration, it invariably means the assertion of power over nations through expansionism. So again, the true faces has been revealed here, that even if such fascist leader they are talking about the decay of culture and its rejuvenation, ultimately it's another way of grabbing power, especially through war and conquest. So such inflammatory talks, such inflammation, such rhetoric, they have a purpose, which is to grab as much power as possible, and other than what you can directly control, which in the case of fascist leader, it is their subject, which is already under their control. But it is the greed of power, it greed of more power that move them to seek it via any mean possible, whether fair and foul. And this talk of cultural rejuvenation, it is another such tactic to incite people into war and conquest. So, such expansionism, which is influenced by social Darwinism and a belief in national and sometimes racial superiority, fascist nationalism became inextricably linked to militarism and imperialism. So, again, the link has its various causes and factors that have been shown here. Then Nazi Germany it looked to construct a greater Germany, to build an empire stretching into Soviet Union, which is Lebensraum, which is living space in the East. So again, here the the fascist leader, in particular here Adolf Hitler, he wanted to extend into extend everywhere, expand into all areas possible. But especially, he started with this talk by expanding in the East. The reason for which is he said people of our race, the people of our superior race of blue-eyed Nordic Aryans, they needed much living space in the East, which is in the Soviet Union, for which you need to extend your arms via militarism and weaponization. Then fascist Italy, it sought to found an empire through invasion of Abyssinia in 1934. Examples are given here. And the same way, Imperial Japan, it occupied Manchuria in 1931 in order to find a pro-prosperity sphere in new Japanese-led Asia. These empires were to be autarchic, which is based on strict self-sufficiency. And in the fastest view, economic strength, it is based on the capacity of the nation to extract resources and energies which it directly control. And such resources and energy will come under its control only by conquest and expansionism. Then let's talk about type of fascism. So there are two types of fascism: extreme statism and extreme racism. Extreme statism, subtopic of which is the totalitarian ideal. So totalitarianism is a controversial concept. The height of which its popularity came during the Cold War period, when it was used to draw attention to parallels between fascist and communist regime. So generic fascism, it tends towards totalitarianism in at least three aspects. Totalitarianism means to the absolute control over power. So there are three aspects in which such absolute power is controlled. First, the extreme collectivism that lies at the heart of fascist ideology, which is the goal of creation of a fascist man who will be loyal, dedicated, and utterly obedient. So this creation of a loyal and obedient fascist man, it obliterates distinction between public and private existence. So such as just like I have said, the fascist leader, they try to remove the existence of individual thought. So individual thought will be removed only when all ideas that relegate people to think about themselves, all such talks, all such principles, all of them that somehow get a relationship with individuality, they are removed and obliterated. And it is only when individual is removed from political canvas that total power will be cornered by one man. Then second aspect, the fastest leader principle invests the leader with unlimited authority, which violates the liberal idea of distinction between state and civil society. So as you said, as you already know, that all the liberal principle of modern day democracy, they have distinction between the powers of state and civil society. And the relation between state and civil society is it is governed by a rule book known as constitution. But the fastest leader in their quest for power, in their quest for unquestionable power, they needed this unlimited authority. So for which this can happen only when people are actively participate, but they are participating in, you can say, without any idea of individuality. So this is the gist here. This is the crux here. It is not that fascist leaders are in need of popular support. Even constitutional leader, even people, leaders from liberal democracies, they also have popular support. What fascist leader need is a cult-like support. They need to have this messianic personality at all pervasive, unquestionable obedience. That this is what fuels their power, and this can happen only when people are totally committed and actively participating in fueling such a messianic image. Then third, the monistic belief in single value system and a single source of truth places fascism odds with all forms of pluralism. So here monistic, it means that power is power lies with one person only, And again, all the three principles, all the three aspects, they are interchangeable and somehow similar. So the essence of Italian fascism was a form of state worship. So in a formula which was regularly repeated by Mussolini, which everything for the state and nothing against the state, nothing outside the state. So then the fascist theory of state has sometimes been associated with the idea of German philosopher Hegel. Hegel portrayed the state as an ethical idea reflecting the altruism and mutual sympathy of its member. So here, Hegel's political philosophy therefore amounted to an uncritical reverence for the state, which might have been employed by the fascist leader. But ultimately, fascist leader in their quest for power, they needed that there is no threat to their authority, which can happen only when people are actively participating, but without any idea, without any trace idea of their own individuality. Then, in contrast to the Italian fascism, the Nazis they did not venerate the state, but viewed it as a means to an end. Hitler he described state as mere vessel, implying that creative power derives not from the state but from the race, the German people. So here Hitler he describes state as an instrument of the National Socialist Weltanschauung. Then the Nazi state was brutally effective in suppressing political opposition and succeeded in extending political control over the media, culture, education, and many organs of government. And by comparison, despite its formal commitment to totalitarianism, the Italian state operated, whereas the Nazi state the government machinery or any other organ of the state, it was subverted, subordinated, or subjugated. For example, the case of Italian fascism in which the Italian state operated, example is given. The Italian monarchy, it survived through the fascist period. Many local political leaders, especially in the south, they continued in power. The Catholic Church, it retained its privileges and remained independent throughout the fascist period. So you can see the differences here that the Italian fascists they try to extol state more than any other organ. They believe that it is the state which should corner all the power, and it was not based on any uh, racial or ethnic idea. Whereas the German or the Nazi state, it was based on the ethnic, the cultural idea, and its leader, Adolf Hitler, he wanted power to himself at any cost, and for which again he subverted all forms of political activity in his own sphere. Then another core theme, corporatism. So Italian fascists, even though they revered the state, it this attempt did not extend to an attempt to collectivize economic life. So fascist economic thought was seldom systematic because ultimately it was more about power dynamics than economic life. So even if they spout some economic idea based on cultural or based on what they made sense of life, their economic thought were nowhere near to coherence. And their economic thought it sought to transform human consciousness rather than social structure. And its distinguishing feature was the idea of corporatism, which Mussolini portrayed as the third way, an alternative between capitalism and socialism. So here, corporatism is an economic idea espoused by fascist leader without any head and tail, without any coherence. Still, it somehow resembled a compromise between capitalism and socialism. which is corporatism. It opposes both the free market and central planning, and it is based on a belief that business and labor, they are bound together in an organic and spiritually unified whole. And all the social classes, they do not conflict with one another, because this conflict, this will give identity to all the social classes other than the fascist leaders, which which will not be tolerated by the power grid held by such fascist leader. Because as I uh, uh, expressed many times, fascism, it is all about power, power that is cornered and concentrated in a single hand in a supreme leader. So any other thought, any activity, any principle in any other sphere, such as we are talking about economic principle. So here, both socialism and capitalism, both of them, they will provide a sense of individuality. They will socialism, in one sense, it will give people collective right. So a fascist leader will not tolerate any power sharing with any other body. If capitalism is supported, it will give people a sense of individuality and reason. Both of them were imminent threat to the messianic tendencies sought by fascist leader. So again, their idea was more incoherent and vague, and they tried to find a way out, but ultimately it could not be. So you can see in the box, corporatism in broader sense is a means of incorporating organized interest into process of government. So there are two phases of corporatism: authoritarian corporatism, that is closely associated with fascist Italy. As an ideology, this authoritarian corporatism, it offers an alternative to capitalism and socialism based on holism and group integration. So, in short way, it consider there should not be any struggle between capitalist and socialist class. All people of a country, they should behave in a way that one fosters the another, and this is what they they usually extol by group integration. Then, as an economic form, it is characterized by extension of direct political control over industry and organized labor. So here, the political phase of corporatism, it is the state control over both capitalism and socialism via controlling industry and labor both. Then liberal corporatism, which is practiced by the neo-fascists, it refers to a tendency found in mature liberal democracy for organized interest to be granted privilege and institutional access to policy formulation. So this liberal corporatism, also practiced in liberal democracies, it is for providing access to policy formulation. And who is being provided access? Those organized interests, which means the principles of lobby. So here, by lobby, I can mean a corporate lobby and a labor union, both of which are organized interest, and both of them, their interest and their experiences can be taken into account. Then finally about corporatism, 22 corporations were set up in Italy in 1927, each each representing employers, workers, and government, which means no distinction between uh, different strands of political or economic ideology. These corporations were charged with overseeing the development of all major industries in Italy. The corporate state reached its peak in 1939 when a chamber of fasces and corporations were created to replace the Italian parliament. Then next principle, modernization. So the state also exerted a powerful attraction for Mussolini and Italian fascists, because the state, it was an agent of modernization. It was seen as such. So Italy was less industrialized than many of its European neighbors. So Italian fascism, it equated national revival with economic modernization, for which they started their own activities, and they were also forward looking by extolling the virtue of modern technology and industrial life. So their belief in this economic modernization were also influenced by futurism, which was led by Filipino Marinetti, and they also had a belief in dynamism, a cult of machine and rejection of past. And let's have look at next principle, extreme racism. So in the social sphere, and it is in the social sphere in which fascism and its vulgar play of words, vulgar rhetoric gives us a visible expression. It is because most other sphere, whether it is political, economic, industrialization, racial, linguistic, literature, all of them, even if they were extreme ideas or radical ideas, they could not have made people kill each other. But it is the social sphere which the tampering of which can lead to have many genocidal tendencies, which were overtly seen in fascism. Well, not all forms of fascism they involve overt racism, and not all racists are necessarily fascists. So Italian fascism, for example, based on supremacy of fascist state over individual and submission to the will of Mussolini. So here, in the case of Italian fascism, it was primarily a political maneuver, a political way out to grab power. So, and in a way, it was voluntary submission of power. When Mussolini passed anti-Semitic laws after 1937, he did so largely to placate Hitler and the Germans rather than for ideological purpose. Nevertheless, fascism has often been coincided and bred from racist ideas. Then let's have a look at politics of race. The term race, it implies that there are meaningful biological or genetic differences between human beings. So all over there are four races. So four biological races: Caucasoids, means the white race; Mongoloids, the people of East Asian country, Japan, China, South Korea, North Korea; then Negroid, people of dark complexion; and then Australoid, people that have some feature that resemble uh, dark complexion other than some, where along with some Caucasoid features. So these are biological differences that are governed by the principle of geography, and they are in no way they portray man in terms of their capacity. So the anyone's physical characteristic, anyone's complexion, whether it is dark or whether they have yellowish skin, whether they have straight hair, whether they have epicanthic fold, whether their stature is tall, whether they have white skin, none of these physical characteristics they portray or they can clearly estimate this, you can say, caliber or competence of a certain individual. In other words, physical characteristics they do not tell much about individual capacity. But yet, this force it was used by fascist leader for their own reason and for wrong reasons. So, while it may be possible to drop one's national identity and assume another by process of naturalization, by which you can take any citizenship, but it is impossible to change one's race determined as it is at birth. So race, whichever complexion you are, whichever biological race you belong to. There are physical traits that are governed by geography, and then they are integrated into your genome, in your DNA. You cannot change them. So the symbols of race, such as skin color, hair, skin tone, hair color, physiognomy, blood, they are fixed and unchangeable. But then there were many misplaced ideas, such as during imperialism, white race it has been closely associated with a higher intelligence, and they used to look down upon people of other races, people of black, brown, and yellow races of Africa and Asia. So the core assumption of racism is that political and social conclusion can be drawn from idea that there are innate and fundamental differences between the races of the world. And such differences are biological. But when you equate such biological differences with having less competence in political and social spheres, this is problematic. So, in short, the maxim genetics determine politics, it is the core argument of racism. A form of implicit racism has been associated with conservative nationalism. Most of the conservatives, the conservative political streak all over the world, they also practice racism, but their racism, even if it is not good, it is limited up to a certain extent. They talk about common culture, shared value, common physical characteristic, and many argue against migration of non-white into their countries. So most of it is related to such immigrant policies. But a more systematic and developed form of racism, it is based on explicit assumption about nature, capacity, and destiny of different racial groups. So when nature, capacities, and destinies are taken into account, then it becomes a highly charged and highly volatile, highly inflammatory political thing. In many cases, the differential assumption of people's capacity, they had religious basis. For example, 19th century European imperialism, it was justified. Imperialism means to annex other colonies by conquest. It was justified by alleged superiority of the Christian people of Europe over heathen people of Africa and Asia. You might have heard about white man's burden. So by which it was assumed that white people they had innate superiority in cultural and intelligence attributes, and the people of other countries, especially those who are not white, they need to be subjugated because they are heathen and they are less intelligent. Then let's have a look at Nazi race theory. So Nazi ideology, it was fashioned out a combination of racial anti-Semitism and social Darwinism. So its origin was largely theological. The Jews were responsible for the death of Christ, and in refusing to convert to Christianity, they were both denying the divinity of Jesus and endangering their own immortal soul. So this association between Jews and evil, it was not a creation of Nazis, but dated to Christian Middle Ages. So if you are not aware about it, during the Christian Middle Ages, the dark medieval time, the Jews, they were they were considered the murderer of Jesus Christ, and for which they were hated. So this hatred, it takes form of anti-Semitism. However, this anti-Semitism, it intensified in late 19th century when nationalism and imperialism it spread throughout Europe. Jews were subjected to increasing persecution in many countries. So in France, this led to celebrated Dreyfus affair, in which Jewish army officer Alfred Dreyfus was largely charged with delivering defense secret to Germany, and Russia, it was reflected in the series of pogroms created out against the Jews by the government of Alexander III. So such instances, such persecution of Jews during the nationalist tides of 19th century were many. However, the growth of science of race, which applied pseudoscientific ideas to social and political issues, led to Jewish people being thought of as a race rather than religious, economic, and cultural group. So, Jew is not a biological race, but uh, this cocktail of religion with political principle, uh, religion and political issues, this cocktail led to led to the representation of Jew as a different race, a different and reviled race. So this anti-Semitism was therefore elaborated into a racial theory which assigned to Jews a pernicious and degrading racial stereotype. The first attempt to develop a scientific theory of racism was undertaken by Joseph Arthur Gobineau. Gobineau, he argued that there is a hierarchy of races with different qualities and characteristics. The most developed and creative race are white people, whose highest element Gobineau referred to as Aryans. Jewish people, on the other hand, were thought to be fundamentally uncreative. So this was the first elaboration of anti-Semitism. Then this doctrine of racial anti-Semitism, it entered Germany through Gobineau's writing and took the form of Aryanism. Aryanism, as I've said, is a belief in biological superiority of blue-eyed Nordic Aryan people. And this idea was taken up by Richard Wagner and H.S. Chamberlain. And Chamberlain, he defined highest race more narrowly as Teutons, which more clearly understood as German people, while the Jewish people were described physically, spiritually, and morally degenerate. So again, this racial theory, the its pseudo interpretation, and then the stereotyping, all of them they were led to creation of an inflammatory atmosphere. Then Chamberlain presented history as a confrontation between Teutons and the Jews, and therefore prepared the ground for Nazi race theory. Then again, when Nazi employed and accepted such a theory, they blamed the Jew for Germany's defeat in the First World War, and they were considered responsible for the humiliation at the Treaty of Versailles, and they were behind the financial power of banks and big business that enslaved the lower middle classes. All in all, they were stereotyped as corrupt, degenerate, and needed to be weeded out. Then Nazism or National Socialism, it portrayed the world in pseudo-religious, pseudo-scientific terms as a struggle for dominance between the German and the Jews, representing the forces of good and evil, respectively. So good were Germans, evil were Jews, and they divided the race of world in three. The first, Aryan, the Herrenfolk or the master race. Then second were the bearers of culture, people who were able to utilize the idea and invention of German people. And in the bottom were the Jews. Again, the same stereotyping and propaganda thing that helped Hitler stay in power and mobilize people for such a genocide. So the Hitler's maniacal worldview was dominated the idea of conflict between good and evil, which was reflected in the struggle between German and Jews. And as I've said, those were tough times, and people were in need of such a messianic revelation in which their anger and their insecurity could be uh, could be channelized, and such channelization, even if people had their trust in it, such fears and insecurity were not just channelized, they were exploited. But, the ideology which Hitler took, it brought Nazi in a tragic direction. So this Nazi ideology, it therefore dictated an aggressive foreign policy in pursuit of a racial empire, and which should ultimately culminate in a world dominion. Second, the Nazi, they believed that Germany could never be secure as long as its arch enemies, the Jews, continued to exist. Then the Nuremberg laws, which were passed in 1935, prohibited both marriage and sexual relations between German and the Jews. Then after Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass, in 1938, the Jewish people were effectively excluded from economy. And finally, it led to persecution and genocide, racial extermination. Then in 1941, with the world war still to be won, the Nazi regime it embarked on what I call a final solution, an attempt to exterminate the Jewish population of Europe in an unparalleled process of Holocaust. Then let's have a look at the another core thing, peasant ideology. So a further difference between Italian and German brand of fascism is the later, the German brand, it would advance a distinctively anti-modern philosophy. So while Italian fascism were eager to portray itself as modernizing, Nazism it reviled much of the modern civilization as decadent and corrupt. So in the Nazi view, the German are in truth peasant people which are ideally suited for simple existence. And in their blood and soil idea, Nazism it wanted to revive the old ways, the by blend of Nordic racism and the rural romanticism to create a peasant philosophy that prefigured many of the idea of ecologism. And they also explain why the Nazi extol the virtue of culture, which embody the folk tradition and craft of German people. So you can see the difference between Italian and German fascism. The Italian fascism, it um, kept on the modernizing line, modernizing by way of industrialization, whereas German fascism, it harked back, it pulled back on older times. So, and this is why this peasant or rural ideology had important implication for foreign policy. In particular, it helped to fuel expansionist tendency by strengthening the attraction of Lebensraum. So only through territorial expansion could overcrowded Germany acquire space to allow its people to resume their proper peasant existence. So again, it was a way uh, not of extolling the virtue of German culture, it was rather a disguised way to control people, to control their individuality. If people are kept in a pauperized and poor condition, it is only by such pauperization, such poverty, that they will never be able to become a threat to the power. And this is what exactly happened here. If people are in their simple peasant existence, uneducated, illiterate, easy to be influenced, and believing in messianic rather than rationality and reason, then such people could easily be controlled by one such fascist leader. If people are left on themselves, and if such individual tendency, if they are given access to, and the German leaders, especially Adolf Hitler, it believes that if people becomes rich, or if people earns their reasonable sense of money, such money may give them some access to education and such rational idea. And any such rational idea, it's like a spark in a large bundle of dried hay, dried grass. Such a spark can be a challenge to such unquestionable power. Then these are the differences here: fascism versus Nazism. Fascism, state worship versus Nazism considered a state as a vassal. Fascism with chauvinistic nationalism, whereas Nazism it is equated with extreme racism. Here, voluntarism, which means voluntary submission to state power, whereas the submission to state power, the submission to power, submission or obedience to political leader was essential and mandatory. Fascism in Italy talks about national greatness, whereas Nazism is talked about biological superiority. Italian fascism, it originated, talked about organic unity, whereas Nazism, it preferred racial purity and eugenics. Here, fascism, it dealt with pragmatic or practical anti-Semitism so as to placate the other fascist leader, whereas the anti-Semitism of Nazism was genocidal. The Italian leader, they believed in future and modernism, whereas the German fascism, it traced back to peasant ideology. The economic life, the economic idea of Italian fascism based on corporatism, giving a middle way between socialism and capitalism, whereas German fascism, it talked about war economy. Then the central ideological goal of Nazi regime were conquest and empire. You can see here the ultimate goal of Adolf Hitler was to be an emperor, to build an empire, and such quest for power dictated the expansion of industrial base and development of technology of warfare. Even the period of German fascism, it witnessed rapid industrialization, जैसा शुरू में आपको बताया था, and the growth of large town and city is so despised by Nazis. So even if Hitler talked about peasant ideology and he hated much of technology, it is his period that saw rapid industrialization and growth of cities. So this peasant ideology, it was proved to little more than rhetoric. And militarism, it also brought about significant cultural shift. While Nazi art remained fixated with simplistic images of simple town and rural life, propaganda constantly bombarded the German people with images of modern technology from Stuka, dive bomber, and many such weaponries. So in short, here the, you can see the contradictory terms that they talk about simplistic images of simple life and the rural romanticism, but ultimately their propaganda, it visualized people with modern technology. So contradictions are there. Now let's a final look at the future of fascism. So one view of fascism is it was the product of a unique and dramatically combustible combination of circumstances that surfaced during the interwar period. So first, the democratic government had only recently been established. So here, various such combustible circumstances are being listed. First, the absence of democratic government. Second, European society has been disrupted by experience of industrialization, which threatened lower middle class of shopkeepers. Third, after First World War, was deeply affected by 1917 Russian Revolution and the fear among property classes for social revolution. Fourth, World War First had failed to resolve international conflict and rivalries, leaving a bitter inheritance of nationalism and a desire for revenge, especially in case of Germany. And finally, the Great Depression of 1930, it led to unemployment and economic failures. So this implication of this analysis that the nexus of circumstances would never be replicated. So this specter of fascism no longer looms over people. In other words, fascism was, you can say, fascism was a fuel of a different time, and it was only many such difficult and combustible circumstances could have produced fascism in the form that we read today. But since such replication, such reappearance of those same some circumstances is not possible, So we may consider that fascism as an ideology has no future. In effect, it died in 1945 with the death of Mussolini and Hitler. But some they also regard fascism as an ever-present threat by seeing its root in human psychology, as Eric Fromm called it the fear of freedom. So, from this perspective, from this psychological perspective, modern civilization has produced greater individual freedom, but with this individual freedom also comes the danger of isolation and insecurity. So, at times of crisis, individual may therefore flee from freedom, seeking security in submission to all powerful leader or to a totalitarian state or such messiah, such divine authority, such revelation. So one way such conditions of crisis they can also revive. So for example, the end of communist rule in Eastern Europe, it allowed long suppressed national rivalry and racial hatred to re-emerge by giving rise, particularly in former Yugoslavia, to a extreme nationalism that exhibited fascist-type features. Similarly, figures such as Viktor uh, Orban, Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, um, Erdogan in Turkey, Donald Trump in America, all of them, they also exhibit some of these anti-Semitic and fascist features. Then another possibility is that the form of fascism could emerge, which, while being faithful to certain core fascist belief, it accommodates itself in the wider political system. So this neo-fascism, it will accommodate itself into the newer system, newer political literature. But some believe the neo-fascists it still possess the ability to advance politics of organic unity and social cohesion in the times of future economic crisis or bouts of political instability. So some believe that if they appears in the future the same combustible circumstances, then neo-fascists they have the ability to organize and mobilize people. But then this new brand of democratic fascism, it is divorced from principles such as absolute leadership, totalitarianism, and overt racism. So, in other words, this neo-fascism, which is also called democratic fascism, it is simply a contradictory in itself. Because if it is fascist, it cannot be democratic. They are talking about two poles. Even fascist socialism is not possible, then democratic fascism will never be possible. Because fascism, it talks about unquestionable authority in single hand, whereas democracy, it talks about sharing power between all the people, which is a lot more sharing than socialism itself. On the other hand, socialism, it talks about power sharing with the organization, with the social groups. But here in the case of democracy, it is it is a different equation. It will be sharing power between 1 and 1 million. So that's why both the terms are they are contradictory. So on the one hand, in accepting political pluralism and electoral democracy, neo-fascism ceased to be a fascist in meaningful sense. Then others believe that this neo-fascist conversion to democracy may be a tactical ruse, such as many such ruses, such as many such tactical games was seen whenever we read about the fascist rhetorics, that they talk about something else, but ultimately there it was their greed for power that made them find a way, made them shake hands with one political spectrum or one way or another. But ultimately, it was just a use, it was just a tact, a disguise, the the ultimate game, the ultimate uh, aim of the fascist leader was to grab power, for which they, they had employed all possible tactics available. So here in case many believe that this neo-fascist conversion to democracy may be another such tactic, another such disguise, in which case democracy will be used to destroy democracy. And this makes fascists an ever-present threat. So this is it. Thank you very much.